Hey everyone, welcome to the 28th series of Sexuality from the Logic of Sense. In this chapter, Deleuze continues his look at what he calls the dynamic genesis, which is the production of what he calls the surface, the metaphysical surface, which is the place where bodies and ideas meet. And here he's still continuing with his infant psychology. Everything he talks about in this chapter is taking place within the first year of the infant's life. And so it's continuing on with the psychological ideas of Melanie Klein, Sigmund Freud, and a little bit of Jacques Lacan thrown in here. This series of Sexuality is the third position in Melanie Klein's formulation. Deleuze relates these positions of Klein's to his three orientations of philosophy, with the schizoid position relating to the philosophy of the depths, the depressive position being the philosophy of the heights, and now we're getting into the sexuality position, which is how the surface gets produced, according to Deleuze. Deleuze begins this series by saying that there are two senses to the word partial. And in partial, he's referring to partial introjected objects, which we talked about in the previous series. And these objects are not physical objects. They are mental or emotional representations of the infant's experience. And the two senses are, one is the what he calls the stage, with its corresponding drive. So he's bringing in Freud's notion of drives. And the other is its relation to a zone. And he wants to be clear that these stages and zones are separate. So by zones, he is referring to what Freud called erogenous zones. And the erogenous zones represent a territory, and they're always on the surface, whereas a stage, for instance, the oral stage, is characterized by a certain kind of behavior, and that's not on the surface. That's typically in the depths. The two drives are the what he calls the preservation drive and the death drive, or the destructive drive. He also calls the preservation drive the conservation drive, and that has to do with nutrition, with the infant feeding themselves, taking in nutrition, taking in food to preserve themselves, to conserve themselves, to grow. And he also relates it to excrement as part of that drive. Deleuze wants to know, how is this sexual position formed, and says that we need to look at the two previous positions, the depressive one of the heights and the schizoid position of the depths. And he'll basically say it's the reaction of the depressive position to the schizoid position. And he'll say that looked at from the heights, from the bird's eye view of the superego, looking down to the id in the depths, that it liberates the libidinal energy from the conservation drive and from the destructive drive. And this extra energy gets projected onto the surface in one or another of these erogenous zones. Each of these erogenous zones is a dynamic formation of a surface space around a singularity constituted by an orifice. So, for instance, the oral erogenous zone is a formation centered around the singularity of the mouth. So these zones at first are all separate. He calls them like a patchwork quilt. And so what unites these zones is what he says is the phallus, which is not the organ, but it's an image projected by both a little girl and a little boy onto these erogenous zones. It's the area of the genitals which unites these different surfaces into a cohesive whole. He also relates that to the mirror stage in Lacan. And the mirror stage in Lacan is just the infant realizing its own ego and saying, you know, this is part of me. It's subsuming these different zones under, you know, realizing that this is itself. So toward the end of this series, he gets into looking at how the Oedipus complex gets formed, which is very interesting considering the next book he wrote after this is Antiedipus. It was these psychological writings that drew a radical psychotherapist named Felix Guattari to the attention of Deleuze, and Deleuze, on his part, was looking for a psychotherapist, a radical psychotherapist to collaborate with. So they met on the basis of these writings from Logic of Sense, and their first book was called Antiedipus. And so it's, I don't know of any study that's looked at what Deleuze says about the Oedipus complex here with what he'll say later in Antiedipus, whether it agrees or not. It could very well disagree. So he's going to call the Oedipus complex the transition from the bad penis of the depths to the good penis of the heights. And he'll call Oedipus himself the pacifying hero of the surface. So what brings together these fragmented bad parts of the penis and unites it with the good penis of the heights to create the surface. Oedipus is the pacifying hero of the Herculean type. So for the esoteric aspect of this chapter, this might be considered a little bit of a stretch, but it's axiomatic that sexual energy and spiritual energy are the same kind of energy, just put into different activities. And so in terms of building higher bodies, the alchemical formation of higher psychic bodies has to do with liberating sexual energy and the formation of a different kind of surface. Take that or leave it, I guess. So that's about all I have to say for this series, and we'll see you next time.